turn now to Shannon. Shannon, you have been a champion for age-appropriate and consent-based sex ed in your school district. So I'm wondering if, as a middle school teacher, you can share with us what does age-appropriate consent-based sex ed look like in your middle school classrooms?
Yeah, so I teach, like I said, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, so it does look different depending on the age group that I'm working with. But basically, to me, the curriculum that we have, the age appropriate, comes into when we're dealing with topics that are relevant to their development at whatever age group it is. It teaches them information and skills that help to answer questions that they have because it's something that is going on with their body or their world that they're living in. It builds upon the following year, so you kind of touched on the comprehensive part of comprehensive, but that is really important. You know, we focus in 6th grade on more of the anatomy. They get those puberty lessons in 5th grade, but so many of them are just, you know, deer in headlights at that age. So it's kind of, and now, you know, they've lived a whole another year. And so their bodies are changing and their brains are changing, and they're middle schoolers now. And so we do a lot of reviewing of that and naming those parts and giving them that vocabulary that's really important for them to have, and the hygiene piece. And then as they move into 7th grade, once they kind of have the reproductive system and the anatomy part, then they can really start to comprehend the pregnancy and development. You know, you have to understand how your body works before you can understand how people are made. And so then we get into that portion. And then 8th grade is really where we get into the sexually transmitted diseases and the consent. We talk about consent at all 3 ages, but we really hammer it in 8th grade as they move on to high school, and you know, they start dating and they move into those relationships. And so really teaching the consent as a base and not as an outlier, which is new in the last few years, and I was so happy to see that as part of that Senate bill.
Thank you. That is such helpful info, and I really love the way that that schools are thinking about how to stage things and how to build learning on top of other learning, and in particular that piece around, you know, talking to them about pregnancy, STI risk, and consent, you know, perhaps before they're in a relationship, a dating relationship, or before they're sexually active, right? To sort of set that groundwork for them, which you know, if we had a high school teacher here, I'm sure they appreciate all that work you're doing to prepare them for 9th grade health class or 10th grade health class.
Yeah, I think it's just really important. You know, we want to get kids information before they're actually making decisions that could potentially change their lives. And so getting them that information earlier is important. So middle school is a really important time for sexual health.
So in your experience, what does it look like to be LGBTQ inclusive in a middle school setting? And have you heard from any students about like some positive impacts of being inclusive of LGBTQ people?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, students in our classrooms are diverse. There's so much diversity. And so it's really important that they see themselves or a representation of themselves in the curriculum that they're learning, even if it's just reading a scenario or reading a sentence. It's just really important for them to see that represented in what they're learning. Test questions, you know, having it be a same-sex couple, and having that be the scenario that they're reading. Something as simple as that can really be affirmative for a student who is LGBTQ. Promoting the use of pronouns, and you know, Austin, you have been in my classroom, and you know, I slip up, but just making them aware that, like, oh shoot, I'm really sorry, but just affirming the fact that, like, your identity is really important to me, and I want to make sure that you know that, giving them that safe space. I have had students in the past that have said that they appreciated even something as simple as just seeing the safe space sticker that I have. And I champion that through my school too. I try to make sure that all of the teachers have those so that the students feel safe in every classroom that they're in. Asking students their pronouns just kind of helps them, I think, feel seen and gives them a space to be themselves. And so, yeah, I think that those students, you know, every single student needs to feel like they have a place or a person to turn to in a school. And so I'm given that opportunity to be that person, which is pretty cool.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for supporting your students in that way. That is really helpful. And we have two questions that came in. So one was about what does it look like to teach affirmative consent? Could you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah. I've actually had the privilege of having Austin come in, and they do a fabulous job of teaching kids that they need to have a very clear understanding of what consent means. And my students leave with that understanding. So that it's not just, well, I think they're kind of into it. It is, I know that they want this, or I know that they don't. And so that there's no question. There's no falling back on, well, I just assumed. There's no assumptions when it comes to relationships in that way.